The flicker was small at first, barely noticeable. It wasn't just the garage light stuttering to life. It was something subtler, a hesitation, a quiet misalignment in the rhythm of her days. Clara first noticed it the morning she stood barefoot in her immaculate kitchen, holding a cup of tea that had long gone cold. Outside, the sky was its usual Seattle gray, soft, non-committal, refusing to be either fully overcast or convincingly bright. The garden, lush and curated by the same team her ex-husband had hired years ago, looked like something from a magazine. Beautiful, detached, a scene maintained, not lived in. She traced her finger along the marble countertop, remembering the day she'd picked it out. Clara had insisted on that specific slab, veined with charcoal and cream, the centerpiece of what they once called their forever home. Now it was just hers, and somehow that didn't feel like ownership. It felt like aftermath. It had been 6 months since Daniel moved out. No dramatic exit, no shouting matches. Just papers signed in silence. A polite division of things. And in the echo of that politeness, Clara found herself alone in a house full of approved choices. The garage light had been flickering for a week now. Sometimes it worked. Most times it didn't. First she ignored it. Then it started to feel like something more. A metaphor she couldn't quite ignore. It wasn't about the wiring. It was about what refused to stay illuminated. Clara ran her own interior design studio, mostly remote since the world had turned that way. She curated calm, constructed ambience. For others, she made space feel like home. But her own space felt curated to the point of sterility. Every paint swatch and throw pillow perfectly placed, and utterly silent. There were days she didn't speak aloud until late afternoon, and still she wore her independence like armor. "You're doing so well," people would say, their voices tinged with surprise, as though she were expected to fall apart. But strength can be lonely, especially at night when the quiet grows teeth. That morning, Clara stared at the malfunctioning garage light from the kitchen door and decided, almost impulsively, to make the call. She found a local electrician online. The receptionist's voice was bright, cheerful. "We can send someone over this morning," she said. "His name's Jonas." She repeated the name to herself after she hung up. Jonas. No last name. No expectations. Just someone to fix the light. But part of her, the part that still felt too much and not enough, knew something else had already begun to flicker. He arrived just after 10. Clara saw the van from the upstairs window, older, a little weathered but clean. There was no flashy branding, just the quiet presence of someone who came to fix things, not to sell them. When she opened the door, Jonas stood there with a small toolbox in one hand and a calmness in his posture that instantly disarmed her. He was maybe in his late 30s, broad-shouldered, no wedding ring. His work shirt was dark blue, his jeans worn but neat. The only logo on him was the faint stitching of the company name over his pocket. "Clara?" he asked. His voice was low, steady. "Yes, that's me," she replied. "Thanks for coming." He gave a small nod, then turned his attention to the garage, already observing the fixtures and layout like he'd done it 100 times before. "The exterior light over the garage door has been flickering. The one inside too," she explained, leading him through the house toward the garage entrance. "It's unpredictable. Works one moment, then blinks out the next. Sometimes it flashes like it's mocking me." Jonas smiled slightly but said nothing. He listened. That was the first thing she noticed. His silence wasn't awkward. It was intentional, focused. "I'll need to cut power to this section while I check the wiring," he said. Clara nodded. Let me know if you need anything. She returned to the kitchen, pretending to sort through client emails, but her thoughts drifted. Through the partially open door, she could hear the soft clink of tools, the quiet shifting of movement. There was something grounding about it. Not just the sounds of repair, but the sense that someone, even just for now, was bringing attention to what had been left neglected. When the light in the garage finally glowed steady and strong again, Jonas knocked lightly on the kitchen door. All set, he said. Wiring was old and the motion sensor was failing. I replaced both. Should be stable now. Clara stood, unexpectedly relieved. Would you like a glass of water? Or maybe tea? I just brewed some. The question came out casually, but even she felt the shift in the air. Jonas paused, then gave her a nod. Water would be great, thanks. She poured it into a tall glass, added a slice of lemon. Not because he asked, but because that's how she drank it. As she handed him the glass, their fingers brushed. It was the lightest of touches, the kind you could dismiss as nothing, but she didn't. He leaned slightly against the edge of the counter, sipping slowly, still saying little, still present. Jonas's eyes drifted to the painting on the far wall, an abstract piece Clara had fallen in love with years ago. Daniel had hated it, said it was too chaotic for a dining space. That one, Jonas said, tilting his head slightly. It's bold. Clara was surprised. Most people don't comment on it, or they say it gives them a headache. I like the yellow in it, he said after a moment. It feels like it's trying to break through everything else, like it refuses to disappear. She looked at him, then really looked, and for the first time in a long time she felt something stir. Recognition, maybe. Not of a person, but of a possibility. He didn't stay long after that. Just long enough to finish his water and return the glass carefully to the counter, as though it mattered. Invoice will be sent by email, he said. You shouldn't have any more issues with the light. I appreciate it, Clara said softly. Truly. He nodded again. Then he left.
No lingering. No pretense.
But as the door clicked shut behind him and the house returned to quiet, Clara realized it wasn't the same kind of silence anymore. It didn't press against her. It didn't echo. It waited. The email with the invoice arrived the next morning. Clara paid it within minutes. There was no note, just the amount, the service details, and the same clean, minimal logo stitched on Jonas's shirt. But later that week, as she stood in her study trying to focus on a client's minimalist chic kitchen design, her phone lit up with a number she didn't recognize. She answered on instinct.
Clara.
This is Jonas, from Cascade Electric. Her heart jumped, betraying her before she could steady herself. Oh, she said too quickly. Then gentler. Hi, Jonas. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time, he said. Not at all. She sat down slowly. Everything's working perfectly, by the way. I'm glad to hear that, he said, and then paused. She waited. There was a quiet on the line that felt more like hesitation than dead air. She heard the faint hum of traffic behind him, a turn signal ticking. I know it's not standard procedure, Jonas finally said, but I've been thinking about the painting in your kitchen. The one with the yellow. Clara blinked. Really? I do a bit of woodworking in my spare time. Mostly frames and small pieces. I've been drawn to art again lately. I was wondering if you remember the name of the artist. Her lips curved before she could stop them. Sarah Chun, she said. She used to have a small studio downtown, but I think she's in Portland now. There was a quiet hum of acknowledgement on his end. She paints with emotion, Clara added, her voice softer now. Not everyone likes it. I do, he said simply. Especially the yellow. Another pause. Then, if you ever want to show me the other pieces you mentioned, I'd like to see them. If that's not weird. Her breath caught, not because it was unexpected, but because it wasn't. Because she had already thought of inviting him again more than once. I'm usually here, she said, playing casual. Working from home and all. I remember, he replied. His voice was warmer now. Less formal. Then maybe I'll stop by. If I'm in the neighborhood. You know where I live, she said, almost a whisper. I do, he answered. They said goodbye, nothing dramatic. But when the call ended, Clara sat motionless for a long time, the phone still in her hand. Something in her chest felt bright, quietly electric. It wasn't a love story, not yet, but it was something. A pulse. A shift. A soft, steady flicker. He didn't text before arriving. He simply rang the doorbell one golden late afternoon, as if he belonged to the kind of moment that needed no planning. Clara had just finished adjusting fabric swatches for a moody penthouse palette when she heard the soft chime. She opened the door, and there he was. Jonas. Not in his work shirt this time, but a simple dark t-shirt and clean jeans. He held a small box in both hands, wrapped in brown paper and twine. I hope I'm not intruding, he said, a quiet smile forming at the corners of his mouth. You're not, Clara replied, stepping aside. He handed her the box. Lavender lemon shortbread. From the farmer's market. I remembered. You had lemon in your water. Her breath caught. She took the box gently like it might dissolve. That's very thoughtful. Inside the kitchen, the scent of sun-warmed herbs and sweet citrus hung gently in the air. Jonas looked around, letting the silence settle. He didn't try to fill it. Neither did Clara. I've been wanting to show you the other pieces, she said after a moment, motioning toward her study. They walked past the wide window that faced the garden, now bursting in late summer color. In her study, two smaller paintings by Sarah Chun hung side by side. Less chaotic than the one in the kitchen, but no less honest. They carried that same undercurrent of tension, like emotion barely contained within brushstrokes. Jonas studied them quietly, head slightly tilted, arms folded. She knows how to leave space, he said. Like silence in music, the pause that makes the next note matter more. Clara turned toward him, caught off guard by the observation. That's beautifully said. He met her eyes. That's how it feels. Later, they sat on the small patio off the kitchen. The sun had dipped just below the hedges, casting soft shadows on the stone tiles. Clara brewed coffee and they shared the shortbread, delicate, buttery, fragrant with lemon zest and lavender. They talked about small things. Work. Wood types. The quiet dignity of handmade things. Jonas spoke about his father, a carpenter. About a childhood filled with sawdust and half-finished shelves. About how he drifted toward art, then away from it, when life demanded more practicality than passion. Clara told him about design clients who confused beauty with perfection, and how tired she was of polishing lives that didn't feel lived in. And then, at some point between a laugh and a sip of coffee, she reached for her cup and almost tipped it. Jonas moved without thinking, steadying the porcelain, his fingers brushing hers. Just a second, but it changed something. They looked at each other, not dramatically, not with breathless urgency. Just longer, deeper. He didn't speak. She didn't pull away. Instead, Clara said softly, "It's strange. You feel familiar." Jonas's voice was low. "I was just thinking the same thing." And then, slow, deliberate, he leaned in. Their foreheads almost touched. Clara didn't close her eyes, not at first. She wanted to remember the moment before the moment. When their lips met, it wasn't hungry. It wasn't hurried. It was recognition, like finding a melody you forgot you loved. When they parted, the sun had nearly set. The shadows were longer, but the house felt warmer somehow, like something had shifted, not just in the light but in the air itself. He didn't stay. Not yet, but as he stepped out onto the porch, Jonas turned back, his voice soft. "That yellow in the painting. Still the best part." Clara stood in the doorway after he left, holding the small box of cookies in her hands. Inside her chest, something luminous and tender had stirred awake. Not a storm, not yet a fire, just the unmistakable beginning of a glow. The next morning, Clara didn't reach for her usual Earl Grey. She brewed coffee instead, dark, strong, fragrant, using the beans she hadn't touched since Daniel left. The scent filled the kitchen, grounding and unfamiliar, like a room that had quietly changed its furniture overnight. Outside the window, the light draped gently across the garden, casting soft lines over the lavender she had almost let die last spring. She stood still for a moment, coffee in hand, watching the way the breeze moved through the trees. The house was quiet, but it wasn't the kind of quiet that echoed. It was the kind that listened. She thought of Jonas, the way he looked at the paintings, the way his fingers had steadied the porcelain cup, the way he didn't rush to speak. He hadn't made any promises. There had been no declarations. And maybe that was why it lingered, because it had been real. Quietly, wholly real. Later, Clara sat in her studio and tried to work. She adjusted digital mock-ups, answered a few emails. But her mind drifted, not to fantasy, not to projection, just to presence. To what it felt like to sit beside someone and not need to explain who you are. She wandered into the kitchen around noon, the leftover shortbread still resting on a small ceramic plate. She broke off a piece, tasting lemon and butter and something else she couldn't quite name. Something soft, something hopeful. She didn't hear from Jonas that day. She didn't expect to, but when she walked past the painting in the breakfast nook, the one Daniel once asked her to move because it didn't match the mood, she didn't feel doubt anymore. She didn't feel the need to defend it. She stood in front of it quietly and said aloud, to no one in particular, "You're not meant to match. You're meant to be seen." That night, Clara fell asleep easily. The air in the bedroom felt warmer, the silence around her softer, as if the house too had exhaled. And in her dreams, she stood in a room washed with yellow light, not dazzling, not blinding, just enough to find her way back to herself. It was nearly midnight when Clara unlocked her phone. She wasn't expecting a message. She wasn't waiting. At least, not in the way she used to, the kind of waiting that ached. This was quieter. A stillness with room for hope. She opened her messages, scrolled past unread news alerts and promotional emails, and landed on his name, Jonas. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard. She typed, "That yellow in the painting. It's been catching the light differently all day." Then paused, stared, deleted. She typed again, "I think the house feels different. Or maybe it's just me." Backspace slowly. In the end, she wrote nothing. Just stared at the blinking cursor in the message window that felt, for a moment, like a confession booth. She saved the draft and set the phone down. Across the room, the same painting stood exactly where it always had. But tonight, it shimmered as if it knew she was finally looking at it the way it wanted to be seen. She stood up and walked toward it, barefoot on the cool tile. The yellow still shone, quiet, insistent, not to demand attention but to offer it. She thought of what Jonas had said weeks ago the first time he noticed the color. It feels like it's trying to break through everything else. Yes, that was exactly what it felt like. In her study, the design projects lay in tidy stacks. Renderings, swatches, samples, all waiting for decisions. She'd always prided herself on choices, clean, confident ones. But maybe for once she didn't need to choose anything. Maybe she just needed to feel. She walked back into the kitchen, poured the last of the coffee from earlier into a mug, and reheated it. It tasted bitter, slightly burnt, imperfect. She smiled as she drank it anyway. 12:03 a.m. The digital clock glowed softly across the room. Clara was just about to turn off the kitchen light when her phone buzzed on the counter. One message. No photo.
No emoji.
Jonas, I passed your street tonight. Your kitchen light was still on. Couldn't help but wonder if you were awake. She stared at the words, her heart skipping, not from shock, but from a quiet gladness she didn't expect to feel so fully. Her fingers hovered above the keys for a moment, then typed, I am, sent. The reply came almost instantly. Jonas, I just finished a job nearby. It's strange out tonight. Quiet in a way that feels expectant. She read the sentence twice, then typed slowly, would a cup of tea be too much past midnight? For a moment there was only silence. Then the 3 dots. Jonas, if you're sure, I could stop by for 10 minutes. Clara didn't answer in words. She filled the kettle, opened the cupboard for the tea leaves, lit the small lamp near the entryway. Her hands moved easily, without the fluttery urgency of a first date or the polished precision of a planned evening. No performance.
No pretense.
Juste. Just now, just a man who had passed her street and wondered if her light meant something. She stepped outside for a moment while the water boiled. The porch was cool. The moon hung low, thin and soft. She could hear distant tires on wet pavement, then headlights, slow, familiar, the quiet hum of his van idling in front of her gate. She opened it before he could knock. Jonas stepped out, a little surprised, a little sheepish. His jacket was slightly damp at the collar. His hands empty, but his eyes steady. I wasn't sure if I should have texted, he said. I'm glad you did, Clara replied.
She stepped back. He stepped in. And the night continued, not as an interruption to their lives, but as something gently folding itself into both. The tea was jasmine this time. Clara poured it into 2 cups, the thin porcelain kind she rarely used, the ones meant for guests that never came. Jonas sat across from her at the small kitchen table, his jacket now hanging on the back of the chair, his hands wrapped around the warm cup. The kitchen was quiet, except for the soft clink of ceramic and the occasional whistle of wind against the window panes. Jonas looked around, then said quietly, It feels different at night. Clara nodded. I think everything feels different when the world gets quieter. He hesitated, then leaned forward slightly. I wasn't entirely honest the last time we talked. She looked up, steady. I didn't just pass by your street tonight, he said. I drove past it on purpose. I've done that before. I just didn't have the courage to stop. Clara's lips parted, but she didn't speak. She wanted him to go on. I don't really know what this is, he continued. But ever since the first day I stepped into your garage, I've been thinking about the way it felt in your house. The way it felt to stand in front of that painting. The way you looked at it, like it was telling the truth about something no one else wanted to say. Clara swallowed. Her fingers tightened slightly around the handle of her cup. I used to study painting, Jonas added. Before I dropped out to help my family. I stopped creating anything after that. But your house. Your art. They reminded me that something inside me hadn't stopped wanting. The words hung in the air, not desperate, not performative. Just quietly brave. Clara reached across the table. Her hand rested gently on his, warm and steady. I'm glad you stopped tonight, she said. He turned his palm upward, lacing his fingers lightly with hers. No promises. No declarations. Just two people in the soft light of a kitchen, holding warmth in their hands and letting honesty unfold between them. Outside, the night deepened. But inside, something had shifted. Not dramatically. Not loudly. But completely. The tea was jasmine this time. Clara poured it into 2 cups, the thin porcelain kind she rarely used, the ones meant for guests that never came. Jonas sat across from her at the small kitchen table, his jacket now hanging on the back of the chair, his hands wrapped around the warm cup. The kitchen was quiet, except for the soft clink of ceramic and the occasional whistle of wind against the window panes. Jonas looked around, then said quietly, "It feels different at night." Clara nodded. "I think everything feels different when the world gets quieter." He hesitated, then leaned forward slightly. "I wasn't entirely honest the last time we talked." She looked up, steady. "I didn't just pass by your street tonight," he said. "I drove past it on purpose. I've done that before. I just didn't have the courage to stop." Clara's lips parted, but she didn't speak. She wanted him to go on. "I don't really know what this is," he continued. "But ever since the first day I stepped into your garage, I've been thinking about the way it felt in your house. The way it felt to stand in front of that painting. The way you looked at it, like it was telling the truth about something no one else wanted to say." Clara swallowed. Her fingers tightened slightly around the handle of her cup. "I used to study painting," Jonas added, "before I dropped out to help my family. I stopped creating anything after that. But your house, your art, they reminded me that something inside me hadn't stopped wanting." The words hung in the air, not desperate, not performative. Just quietly brave. Clara reached across the table. Her hand rested gently on his, warm and steady. "I'm glad you stopped tonight," she said. He turned his palm upward, lacing his fingers lightly with hers. No promises. No declarations. Just two people in the soft light of a kitchen, holding warmth in their hands and letting honesty unfold between them. Outside, the night deepened. But inside, something had shifted. Not dramatically. Not loudly. But completely. This story is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. The content is intended for emotional storytelling and reflective purposes only. It does not depict or encourage any form of inappropriate relationship, behavior, or conduct. Viewer discretion is advised.